and welcome to a new episode of IG Live with Astrid, your APD, your dietitian with T, no C. And I am joined today by Efferding. We are talking about vertical diet and everything related to his preferences when it comes to food choices, food quality, micronutrients, nutrient density, when it comes to a diet, performance, health. So it's going to be fun because we're going like a rapid Q&A doing or asking this or that, and he has to respond with his choice, and also he has to pinpoint why he's choosing that food specifically. Underrated, overrated, when it comes to choosing a sports nutrition supplements for performance. Very good. Very happy to see you.
How do I look? Got myself all positioned here. How's my hair? Is it good?
Beautiful.
Awesome.
Looking amazing. I'm very happy to see you. I hope you're doing well. Let's get right into what I wanted to ask you today.
Okay.
So I decided to make it fun and a little bit different because I know we always do these Q&As. So trying to make it a little bit in a different angle because you have founded the vertical diet and you focus a lot of nutrient density, the importance of quality. Yeah. I'm really keen to ask you specifically food choices when it comes to health, nutrition, quality, and performance. So I'm going to say two options or two or three options, this or that, and you got to choose which one would be kind of the best option or your preferred option in your case. I'll probably explain why is that your best choice.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'll try and be quick. I'm ready. Let her rip.
All right. So the first one is egg whites or whole eggs?
Well, I always like to keep at least one whole egg in there. We do have some research on this where we had egg whites compared to whole eggs, and they equated for protein and total calories. And they found that the whole egg group, this was men in particular lifting weights, they found that the whole egg group had better hypertrophy and better strength outcomes. But even for women, I've always said that if you just use whole or egg whites exclusively, the avidin binds to biotin, and biotin's good for skin, hair, and nails. And you might see some decline in some brittle hair and some poor skin as a result of just too much egg white. And so I like to keep at least one yolk in. I know if you're controlling fats, if that's a concern, at least split them. Maybe put in a few whites with a whole egg just to keep the biotin in there. Okay,
so would be whole eggs. You definitely want to keep them in there. And I know that there is so much fear about cholesterol and like if you eat, how can I eat 3 eggs a day? And like, man, yes, you can. There's no issue with egg cholesterol. Actually, there's nothing wrong with it. And at the end of the day, if you're controlling your total fat intake, and let's say that was your only fat that you were eating in a day, that's actually absolutely fine. So what are your thoughts about that? Like, I probably guess that you get this question all the time.
Yeah.
How many eggs can I eat in a day?
Well, it kind of depends on the individual. There is a small percentage of the population that has familial hypercholesterolemia, but might be more subject to an elevation of LDLs or cholesterol as a result of consuming whole eggs. Your liver produces 1,000 milligrams of cholesterol daily, irrespective of your cholesterol consumption, and it will downregulate when you consume cholesterol. So 4 eggs a day would be about 1,000 milligrams of cholesterol if you wanted to make that equate to how many eggs you could consume. Fact of the matter is that the dietary guidelines have recently stated that egg consumption is no longer, or cholesterol in the diet is no longer a nutrient of concern as it relates to cholesterol in the bloodstream. It seems that, as you mentioned, if you have a higher fat diet, particularly saturated fats, you may be more apt to elevate your LDL with the combination of the two. If you were going to try and control LDLs, you'd preferentially reduce saturated fats first, rather than worry about cholesterol from eggs. And you might try and avoid cholesterol from other food sources that weren't as nutrient dense and healthy first before you'd worry about eggs.
And the other thing is, actually, there's a lot of questions as well about having raw eggs. What is your stance on this? I am not very fan of that, and I know that there is a high risk of getting the collation of biotin by just the avidin, which is an enzyme that is going to reduce the absorption of biotin, which is an important vitamin that we utilize and we need in our body. So what is your stance on that?
Two very important points there. One being the avidin. When you cook them, the avidin declines. And also the second thing is just bacteria. And the bacteria seems to be more present in the whites than the yolks. If you're going to have to, if you want to choose between the two, some people would just take the yolk out. But generally speaking, you're probably better off at least pasteurizing the white, which most of the supplement companies do, or cooking them.
Salmon or steak? If you had to choose one, what would that be?
Boy, if I had to choose one, I'd say salmon, but I really recommend both. The steak being higher in iron and B12 and zinc, and the salmon, of course, being great with EPA and DHA. But if I just had to choose one, I would say salmon.
Okay, fair enough. Potatoes or rice?
Potatoes, potassium in particular. There's probably twice as much potassium in a potato than there is a banana. And, I like to build that foundation of micronutrients, so potato for sure. Okay.
Oats or pasta?
Kind of indifferent on those. I know there's some suggestion that oats helps with cholesterol, but those massive amounts of consumption of oats that nobody would ever reach in order to get those benefits, and they're very small. So it's really kind of a matter of personal preference and digestion.
And I think one of the things I wanted to bring up with this one sometimes, and probably the next one we're going to talk about, is when it comes to health, or potentially looking at specifically performance. We want to look at high FODMAP foods and high consumption of fiber. So what is your stance on FODMAPs? Because I know you've mentioned a little bit about reducing some of these high FODMAP foods, especially when you're in a diet, or you're eating a lot of calories, or you are working on being your best and performing your best. You don't want to have issues with bloating or diarrhea. So where do you stand on that?
Yeah, we put a chapter in the book on that, on Fodmaps. It's individualistic. Not everybody responds the same to different foods. It's dose dependent. How much of particular foods you eat can matter.
I agree.
How they're prepared, like we mentioned with cooking the egg whites in order to reduce the avidin. The same could be true of things like broccoli and cauliflower. When you cook them really well, they become a little less irritable. Even potatoes, legumes, those things, the more you cook them, it seems that the easier they are to digest. And then it's cumulative in nature as well. Sometimes people can handle one serving, and then if they time to get a second or a third that day, it'd be things like sugar alcohols. It's kind of like filling a bucket up, and eventually it spills over and you start to get those symptoms. So once you recognize that not everybody responds the same, FODMAPs, I didn't invent these. This is just Monash has a very great website that covers all the benefits. But if you need to remedy some sort of digestive distress, such as IBS, the low FODMAP menu seems to be the most studied and shows the most benefits. Not for everyone. 60 to 80% of the people who implement a low FODMAP diet. It's an elimination diet, but it's pretty generous. There's over 100 items on that elimination diet. And the idea is that you eat those foods to see if you can get some relief of symptoms, and hopefully eventually start slowly reintroducing other foods so that you can identify what your triggers are. But that's FODMAPs in a nutshell, kind of a brief overview.
I agree. I think it is important to identify which foods are your triggers and not just completely eliminate everything. But more like, I really like working with a food diary and like a food awareness, and you utilize that at least for a week or two, where you are actually sitting down and writing everything down that you eat and trying to pinpoint which foods are causing you gas, bloating, or discomfort. So you can probably modify. Initially, I would say don't even eliminate it completely. Maybe reduce the dose, because as you said before, it is dose dependent. Sometimes we have a tolerance threshold. So if you have a little bit of that and you don't surpass your own threshold of tolerance, probably you don't have any problems. But if you go over or beyond that threshold, that's when you're going to go and experience symptoms. And that applies as well to lactose. Lactose is something that you can tolerate to some level. Some people might have a higher tolerance threshold, and some people might have less. So that is where you have to kind of experiment. Sometimes that trial and error is a little bit of baga. It's just, you got to do it and go through some of this discomfort at the beginning, but it pays off when you know exactly how much you can tolerate, especially when you're doing or eating out or you're in social events that, well, I know this little amount is not going to harm you. But if you go beyond that amount, probably it's not going to be very pleasant. So, yeah.
No, you picked a good one there. Lactose in particular kind of makes me think about mentioning whether or not you have a food allergy or a food intolerance. The allergy being something that you probably won't be able to consume any of that food. You'll have, like nuts, and some people with peanuts have a food allergy, very commonly with some fish, oysters, things like that. People can have food allergies where they have an anaphylactic response, and that's dangerous. That can kill you. Food intolerances, there's a whole spectrum of really how much of that food you can tolerate based on whether or not you have enough enzymes to digest that amount that you eat. Interesting thing about also about milk products is that some have less lactose than others. You can eat dairy or eat yogurt, and it'll have less lactose than milk. And even a hard cheese will have even less lactose than yogurt if you wanted to get the calcium from those, but minimize the lactose in those. And you can also sometimes need to titrate if you haven't had a dairy product in a while and you don't have the lactase enzyme in any significant amount in the body. And then you might need to have very small doses infrequently until the body starts to build up some lactase, in which case you can tolerate a little more. And for some people, there will be a limit. Others can consume generally as much as they want. And the percentages, a lot of people say that 70% of people are allergic to milk. That's usually used by people who have some sort of axe to grind with animal food consumption. The vegan community will use statistics like that, but dairy allergies are very rare. Dairy intolerances, again, just are dose dependent and regional. And so, and also the type of dairy that you consume can have a huge impact. And the only reason I belabor the point is because it can be of such benefit. We've seen in epidemiology in large populations that the more dairy they consume, the leaner they are and the longer their lifespan, the lower their all-cause mortality. I know that's epidemiology, but we just see a lot of good results from that. We don't see the same problems with potentially saturated fat that you might see in other sources from milk, because the type of saturated fat in milk seems to be cardioprotective. And so, the biggest thing is I chase calcium, and it's such a great source of calcium. And I do like the probiotics in yogurt, even though probiotics have kind of been disappointing in their benefits. And so all those reasons, I just don't think there's any reason to exclude it for those people who don't have an allergy or can tolerate a reasonable dose.
I agree completely. Now, legumes or grains?
I would say legumes. Phosphorus is a big component of legumes that I think is a benefit. Grains tend to be harder for me to digest and kind of another FODMAP. Legumes can be a FODMAP as well, but some of them, if you cook them soft enough, like lentils, can be better tolerated than, say, kidney beans. And so the neat thing about the FODMAP menu is it kind of distinguishes between some of these foods and how well they're cooked.
I agree. Yeah, it is usually recommended to soak them the day before.
Yes.
Just to kind of prevent that gas build up later on.
Yeah. I recommend
absolutely.
the same with oatmeal. Soaking oatmeal overnight, either with a little bit of apple cider vinegar or some yogurt, ferments it. And so the next morning, then you cook it, and it helps kind of pre-digest it. Okay.
Sounds good. Now, full cream milk or a skim milk, which one would you choose?
I would make the choice just strictly on your macros, whether or not you have the fat macros available in your diet once you've consumed the other foods that you want to consume. And we just kind of covered all of the reasons why it does seem to be cardioprotective. I'm not too concerned about the fats in dairy products per se.
Yep.
I wouldn't toss an equivalent amount of fat in your milk or in your coffee from butter. It's a completely different fat. And so I would stick, if you want to use your full cream milk for your coffee, or you like a little bit of it in your oats or something like that, then it's certainly a great option if it fits your macros.
I definitely recommend full cream milk, especially for those who struggle to eat calories. When I am in the hospital, like most of the people I work with, the patients, they don't like eating. And like I actually need to suggest them to switch from low fat or skim milk products to full cream milk products to get a little bit more of extra energy, and we still continue getting the protein from the dairy, which is amazing, but just getting that extra calories from fat. It is good for that particular population who don't like eating. That's so funny.
Yeah, I don't think people appreciate that some folks have a lot of sarcopenia or wasting from a hospital setting or from from diseases. I get a lot of folks that reach out to me that are having a hard time maintaining their weight, and those are some of the recommendations we make. Is throw some full cream in there, put a little honey on it. It could be oatmeal with full cream and honey. And I know people tend to cringe because they think that those things are unhealthy, but it's more unhealthy to not eat enough food to maintain your lean body mass.
I agree, because if you don't eat, you lose weight, and in the elderly, sometimes you lose more muscle than anything else, and that contributes to less quality of life, potentially less immunity, and less independence. And at the end of the day, independence and functionality is huge in older population.
Agreed.
Now, chicken breast or chicken thighs? I know you're not very fan of chicken, but if you had to choose, which one would be your choice?
Yeah, I think people always hear me say, "Have you ever seen a big chicken?" And that's a bodybuilder's comment. But again, it would strictly be a matter of your macros. If you had the fat, room for fat in your diet, if you chose to get your fats from other food sources and needed to stay leaner on your chicken, then that would be the difference. Chicken thigh does have a few more nutrients, some A, D, E, and K. It's a little higher in fat, obviously. So that might be a choice for some people if the micronutrients need to be fulfilled.
Okay. Soft cheese or aged cheeses?
Yeah, I think I just mentioned that the aged cheese tends to have lower lactose. The soft cheeses tend to be a little higher FODMAP. People get a little more gas and indigestion from mozzarella than they do from an aged cheddar.
Yeah, okay. If you only could choose in your diet one option, would be fruits or would be vegetables? That's a hard one.
For me, fruits 100%, because you can pick some reasonably low sugar fruits. Strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, they're very low in calories per 100 grams. I mean, I think a pound of strawberries is only 120 calories, and they still have a good amount of fiber. They're easy to digest. So I'm a big fan of fruits first.
Okay. And actually, there's if you go with the concept of like the botanical concept of certain vegetables, actually certain vegetables are fruit. So they are a little bit sneaky. You could have tomato, you could have avocado, zucchini is one of those that you can eat, and it seems to be fruit.
Yes.
So there you go.
And it's on the low FODMAP menu. Zucchini is squash, and those, cucumber.
There you go. Okay, good choice. Now, natural sweeteners or artificial sweeteners?
I don't think there's really much distinction between the two. I think people tend to get themselves all wrapped around the axle over things that probably don't matter much.
Yeah, I guess it comes back down to your calories and what is your calorie budget.
Yeah.
And I guess the older thing would be, how is your overall diet quality? Like if your diet is really, really healthy and really full in nutrient density, like adding a little bit of extra natural sweeteners is not an issue at all. But if your diet is very poor and on top of that you're adding extra sugar, probably it's not the best option to improve the quality overall of your diet. What would you say?
Agreed. It's a calorie consideration at that point.
Yeah. Okay. Prebiotics or probiotics?
I used to love probiotics. I always used to run around and tell everybody to eat their probiotics, but the research just hasn't given us the benefits that we had hoped for. Prebiotics, things like potatoes, the resistant starch, carrots. There's a host of other foods that you can eat that provide your bacteria in your large intestine something to chew on, so it's not chewing on you. And I think that those are a benefit. We include those in the diet, of course, as a recommendation for that reason. I would love to think that probiotics gave us more benefit, but it seems to be very particular probiotics under very particular circumstances. I mean, it's just not a really broad range recommendation that we can make. And that would be probably more about foods like kimchi, sauerkraut. We're just not seeing the benefits that we had hoped for. I think people thought maybe they could go ahead and jam down some pizza and then throw in some sauerkraut later and fix that problem. But it doesn't work that way. I'd rather eliminate the source than try and OD on something in an effort to fix it. But the yogurt is definitely showing some benefit for health. And so I would still say in terms of fermented foods, dairy is a good one. Yeah.
And so in that case, we would say if we have to choose foods that are sources of probiotics or actual probiotic tablets, you would definitely prefer to have the foods
100%.
Because they have probably a little bit more variety of these much more diversity than just one or two species that are going to be provided by the tablets.
Correct.
Would you agree on that?
100%. Yep.
Well, the last one is about fish oil tablets or fish oil from food. And I know what your answer is.
Yeah, I'm in with food, and even the fish oil tablets. All of the fish oils that people are supplementing. There's not much research to suggest there's much benefit to those. The research that seems to show a benefit is really on megadosing EPA, pharmaceutical grade EPA.
Okay.
And even then, it's really a pretty small LDL benefit. There may be some other benefits that I'm not too privy to right now, but they just haven't seen much, particularly in the 1 gram or 2 gram dose of your over-the-counter EPA, DHA, omega-3 pills. And most of the studies that the omega-3s came from were from populations consuming fish, fatty fish, not from populations consuming supplements. So, and then I worry about the handling of them, the exposure to heat or light. And, I think the research in Australia showed that some 40+% of them were already oxidized and it really wouldn't provide you any benefit at all. So I'm a big proponent of eating fatty fish twice a week. Costco even has a canned salmon, and it's doesn't taste fishy. So if you're not good at buying fish and cooking it, week I'll put down a can of salmon, pink salmon from Costco that's got it's really high in EPA and DHA, and I think that's probably much preferable.
Okay, sounds good. And when it comes to the type of fish oil, like I know there is a little bit of controversy between just the salmon or fish oil versus krill oil. Which one would be your choice?
I'm not that savvy comparing krill oil to fish oil supplements. I would stick with food. I don't think the benefits are seen in the supplements that we had hoped to see, as just mentioned. So I couldn't even distinguish between the two. And I think it's going to be the percentage of EPA DHA.
Yeah,
and EPA seems to be the better one.
Yeah, I think the people stress too much over the little things and the details. And at the end of the day, I think it is more about, I think the getting the right amount of omega-3 fatty acids in your diet, which is the most important thing. Whether you like the salmon version or the other tablet version, that's completely fine at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Now, moving a little bit towards no longer food choices, but more what are your preferences or your stance on different things? Would you spend more time dieting or at maintenance?
I would like maintenance. But if somebody was significantly overweight, we might have to run them on longer dieting. It would depend kind of on how much it impacted their health. But for long-time weight loss maintenance, weight loss retention, I should say, you're better off having the maintenance periods in there. Some people recommend equivalent to the amount of dieting. I think you could probably get away with, 3 or 4 months of dieting and then maybe 2 months of maintenance and then go back to dieting if you still had a lot of weight to lose. And people get frustrated and disenchanted with the process if they don't continue to see progress. And so you got to be cautious how much maintenance you put in there for fear that they kind of fall off the wagon. And maintenance is misconstrued sometimes as have a free-for-all, and it just doesn't work that way.
I think when it comes to maintenance is more thinking that you're not, like as you said, you're not a free-for-all. Is more about being very mindful about your choices, practicing behaviors and habits that are going to help you, especially if you're in a weight loss journey, and implementing these diet breaks or these times for maintenance where you're just going to dedicate further time to make sure whatever you're doing in your dieting phase, you can still apply those skills in your maintenance phase and reassure that everything that you're currently learning and doing, you do it forever and not just in the dieting phase. And I guess a lot of people...
I hate the word diet. I mean, I know that it's just what you eat. It does need to be a lifestyle. It does need to be sustainable. And that's why I choose the foods I choose, because they're the foods that people would otherwise eat if they weren't on a diet. And I just try and provide them in the portions that allow them to reach their goals, whether it's gain, maintenance, or loss. I've just, being in the bodybuilding, figure, physique, bikini industry since the late 80s and training athletes for 30 years, I've just seen the worst of the worst with the egg white tilapia and broccoli diets, and I can't get far enough away from those. I've seen them do so much damage to people, women in particular. And when it really became concerning to me is when social media got so popular and that fitness industry grew so large that soccer moms all around the world started copying those diets. That's when it became tragic, because they suffered all of the downsides and just weren't aware that those diets and those crash programs, the health problems that it was causing them.
When it comes to fat loss, are you more prone to support food quality or food quantity?
In my heart, I want to say quality. I really do. I'm just a huge fan of getting really nutrient-dense whole foods. But calories are king, and we know that. And we know that the McDonald's diet works, and the 7-Eleven diet works, and the Twinkie diet works. And 95% of health benefits are realized simply from the weight loss itself. And people who lose weight, irrespective of the diet, the vast majority of them will lower their blood pressure, lower their blood sugars, and improve their lipids. That doesn't mean the diet's sustainable or healthy long term, but it seems that being overfed yields all of those problems, the metabolic syndrome and all the accompanying health issues that are associated with it. And so the weight loss is of primary importance, and calories is the driver of that. And so it's a great place to start, and then see if you can't make improvements long term. So right back to compliance is the science. And if I could just keep people in a calorie deficit long enough to realize some health benefits and give them enough education so they can make better choices, I think then long term that's a better option.
I agree completely. And I guess food quality plays an important role after, because that is going to define how much you can sustain and manage your appetite, your hunger, everything related to health. So it is so difficult to actually choose that answer. And I know that you were like, oh my God, he's going to struggle with this one, because I know you're a big proponent of food quality. But like it is that if it fits your macros, it's kind of, well, people can lose weight and eating crap, but they still in a calorie deficit. But definitely a little bit of both is completely the best match. Like if you can be in a calorie deficit, but at the same time improve the quality of the diet, that is a perfect match.
Yeah, I think that the quantity can help you lose weight. The quality can help you sustain that weight loss, because the quality speaks more to satiety and energy.
I agree 100% with that.
Yeah.
Now, the next one is, do you decrease sodium intake or increase potassium intake, or a little bit of both for health?
Again, I think it would depend on the individual. Some portion of the population is salt sensitive. They're hypertensive as a result. They would want to watch their sodium intake. That's generally around 30%. About 5+% are actually reverse salt sensitive. If they get too low in sodium, it raises their blood pressure, and they have a host of other problems. The rest of them, I just like to shoot for a 1-to-1 potassium to sodium ratio. And generally it's about 4,000 milligrams of sodium and potassium a day, highly dependent on the individual's current health status, their activity level, the temperature, the humidity, their sweat rate, because people don't actually sweat sodium out at the same rate. So this is a big discussion, that their diet, whether or not they're consuming fast foods and packaged foods as opposed to quote unquote clean eating, would determine how much salt they could add to their diet. But there are some studies on sodium restriction, the DASH diet, but unfortunately, the control group is the standard American diet, and the DASH diet, in addition to lowering sodium, added a whole bunch of fruits and vegetables, which is potassium. And so, where were the benefits realized? From the increase in potassium, from the avoidance of the standard American diet, or from the decrease in sodium? So really hard to say. And generally the DASH diet's done on hypertensives who have a predisposition for being salt sensitive. So hard to glean from the research whether or not there's a kind of a solid recommendation there. But I'm cautious that the individual still enjoys some level of enjoyment of their food, but also their energy levels. This is, again, back to satiety and energy, the two biggest reasons that people fail on their diet. And I see a lot of folks who go on, say, a keto diet, and they deplete their glycogen reserves, which is 3 parts water for every 1 part glycogen. So they get a little dehydrated, and they end up getting the keto flu, and they think it has something to do with the keto diet itself, and it's really a matter of dehydration. And so I'm cautious to make sure that people stay adequately hydrated, particularly because I ask my clients to have some, exercise involved, particularly weightlifting. And I've just found that they perform better when they're well hydrated, and sodium is part of hydration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. And what would be your stance on these salts that you can buy in the supermarket that are kind of half 50% sodium, 50% potassium?
Oh, good question. I'm not a big fan of supplementing potassium. It's real hard on the lining of the stomach. Dr. Sandra Godick is a PhD in thermoregulation and hydration. She runs the Heat Institute. She has a rehydration protocol, and she does not put potassium in it. During exercise, particularly heavy weight training, your muscles will push potassium into the bloodstream. So you already start to have a bit of a change in the ratio. And so she doesn't add it for both reasons. One, because you don't need it, because there's excess potassium in the bloodstream. I don't want to say excess, but there is potassium in the bloodstream from muscle tissue breakdown, but also because it's hard on the lining of the stomach. So not a big fan of supplementing potassium. Hit the fruits, hit the yogurts, hit the spinach. There's 100 milligrams of potassium in every ounce of meat that you eat. Just getting your protein every day is going to give you potassium as well.
What if you utilize, because I don't see that so much in athletes, but in general population, they buy, instead of buying just normal salt, they will buy these 50% potassium, 50% sodium. So they kind of decreasing the sodium intake from the added salts they add into their food, and they are increasing their potassium.
Yeah, potassium is an interesting thing because there are issues with heart palpitations as a result of potassium deficiency. And again, I mentioned the difficulty in aligning the stomach. I'm just not a big fan of supplementing. Supplements are even restricted to, I think, 99 milligrams per dose for that very reason, because you can kind of OD on potassium and have adverse effects. So get a daily potato, chase some fruit, eat a little bit of yogurt, and you're good.